Hello everyone, welcome back to Kansas City. We are here with round 3. We're going to have Leonard Craft, the stream master himself, playing against Brandon Wright, who you just saw last round. They are both 2-0. I just saw Brandon win his second game, and as you can probably see from your screen right now, Leonard has not dropped a game yet. So impressive run for him so far. We're going to see if Brandon's able to take his success from last round and turn it into another win on stream. And Leonard obviously wants to increase his record up to 3-0 as well.
You guys started without me. How dare you?
Hey, can't help that, you're too slow.
I was looking up karaoke bars in the Lavender District around here. So, I'm excited. We've seen quite a few different teams going through this tournament so far. Even though we've got Groudon Xerneas from Leonard here. I think seeing the Fini there kind of makes it a little bit different, the way that team kind of jives together, if you will.
Right.
We did hear Leonard talking about how he really enjoyed using Tapu Fini. He thinks that this team is pretty much unbeatable, which the fact that he's right now undefeated, small sample size, of course, but
right.
It does sort of reflect that he may be on something.
Yeah, I mean, Tapu Fini it has so many really neat support options that even in the past 2 years it's been legal, we just haven't seen it come out from it. And it's really cool to see players, kind of decided to take this Tapu Fini in a different route. A lot of times, Tapu Fini last year were like the standard Calm Line set. They're usually running like Calm Line, Moonblast, Muddy Water, and Protect. And that's, I think, of those 4 moves, maybe one of those ever gets used on Tapu Fini anymore. And so it's kind of cool to see how people have gotten creative with this Pokemon that, it's very bulky. It can take hits from pretty much anything in the metagame, and it has a lot of really cool options.
Yeah, and we've seen a couple places where it might have Soak. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be a problem at this point. But one interesting thing...
you only really run Soak if you have Shedinja, which is a completely different monster.
Yeah, that can be a bit of an issue. Definitely. So one thing that we didn't get to see out of Brandon's team here is that Suicune. We didn't even actually bring it up because we didn't review the teams too much. I know that Jake will also know that Suicune was a thing. I say that because in 2016, I may or may not have faced Jake with a Suicune at maybe a major regional. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to be a thing that we see here at this point. But we do see basically mirror leadouts.
Yeah. It's similar. So Leonard's on the bottom screen, so Brandon's on top this time, where we're not seeing his HP numbers. But we see Leonard's is about the same as Brandon's, so it looks like they're both running this bulkier Xerneas, which is able to take more hits from Pokemon like Groudon that are generally pretty good checks to Xerneas, but it comes at the cost of not being as fast as you might used to be being. So
yeah, so
interesting choice. I think bulky Xerneas makes a lot of sense, especially on teams like these that both have. Leonard has 2 Intimidates. Brandon just has the 1. But if you can prevent your Xerneas from taking damage, you don't necessarily need to be as fast, just because it doesn't matter as much if you're moving first.
So I always like these mirror matchups, or these mirror leadouts rather, where you've got a fake out user and a Xerneas, because there's kind of a mind game at this point where you're trying to figure out where you want to fake out. And so we saw the Intimidates come out here. And it looks like both players are just going to opt for faking out the opposing Xerneas, not wanting to try and play a speed tie type of thing, anything like that. So, watching Intimidates cycle out, you're usually spotting things to try and figure out whose Intimidate might be going faster. And in this case, that might be meaningless because it could be the exact same speed tier. So both players kind of playing that safe bet where they're just like, I want to prevent the Geomancy here and just fake out the Xerneas and make this turn pretty quick.
Right. It's interesting. We saw the Incineroar on Brandon's end fake out first, but then the Xerneas on Leonard's end flinch first. And we're seeing Leonard's Xerneas Geomancy first here. And so it likely tells you something about how they're trained. We saw that maybe Leonard Xerneas is, a little bit bulky, but still has some speed in it, and whereas Brandon is pretty much all bulk. Or, you can train Xerneas a lot of different ways, and so kind of cool to see how that plays out. But we actually just see some damage straight out from Brandon, not wanting to go for that J-Mancy immediately.
Ooh, wow, what a fun little tech there. So we saw Throat Chop come out of Leonard's Incineroar here, and so basically what that's preventing here is that it means that Roar is unavailable because it's a voice, so chopping him in the throat makes it so that his voice is really hoarse. He's not able to roar as strongly. So that roar isn't going to intimidate this Xerneas from being cycled out here. So one thing that I really find interesting is that Brandon here opted for damage instead of trying to go for the Geomancy. Maybe worried himself that there might be a roar coming out of Leonard's Incineroar. So just kind of a few little mind games that are going out here, which I think really makes GS Cup formats just really very technical and interesting in that sense.
Yeah, that was such a good Throat Chop. Throat Chop will block Roar. It also blocks Snarl, which, I don't think we know. No, I think we know that Brandon doesn't have Snarl just based on the moves he's using last round. But, even if he did happen to have Snarl, Throat Chop would have blocked that. And so Throat Chop is a really cool move to use alongside Xerneas. And especially because Incineroar is just such a good Xerneas partner. And so it's really just a perfect support option on a more offensive Pokemon in general.
One thing that we're seeing right here is that there's nothing happening. So this is an unfortunate problem that can arise during tournaments. It looks like we probably have a double game freeze here. So essentially we're kind of stalling for time. Yeah. So because it's a double game freeze, how does this play out?
So I think officially the ruling is that the game is a tie, and then they just move on to game 2. Okay. I think if I'm not mistaken, if this happens and then both players split the next 2 games, then it's sudden death, maybe?
We're going to 1v1 in Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah. It's funny, Leonard just said that every player in the venue got a double game freeze, which is crazy.
So that's kind of interesting. I wonder what caused that. That's really odd.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that happening before. That's really weird.
No. And so, man, that's kind of weird. Because these are QR code tournaments, right?
Right.
So, and it looks like they're going to have a gentleman's agreement here, that they're going to play the exact same moves that they played in the previous match, just to try and get it back to a game state. So this isn't like an official ruling type thing, where you have to agree to do the exact same moves.
Right.
And this is kind of like it's kind of weird because coming from a singles background myself, this is something that you would do if there was a disconnection between 2 players if you were playing on Wi-Fi back in Gen 4, right? Mm-hmm. So back in the Heart Gold, Soul Silver era of playing on DSs, sometimes wireless internet wasn't as strong as it is now. And so the connection would drop a lot more frequently. So one of the common rules that you had as kind of a quick sportsman's agreement, or a sporting agreement, I guess, is that if you had some sort of a disconnection and you were talking to one another on, what was it, MSN Live or something? I don't remember. Yeah, back in the day when AOL Instant Messenger was a thing, when MSN Messenger existed. Back in the days before Skype or Twitter, you would be on IRC or in a chat room or on some sort of messenger with one another, and so you'd be like, all right, well, that was a game freeze, sorry about that, and then you'd go back and you'd replay the same moves, and it was basically a community unwritten rule, if you will, that you're trying to bring the game state back to as close as you could approximate what you were at, so that you could complete that game or finish that game to its completion. So we should see these players both lock in pretty quickly because they both know what they brought.
Right.
And so as we see here, they're both locking in really quickly. And so basically we can kind of discuss, not the turns themselves, so color commentary here won't be as necessary, but kind of where we expect things to go in the future, maybe. Whew. Anyway. it's kind of cool to see that sort of agreement. Like, that's not a thing that's in the tournament rules, but it is kind of a throwback to what we used to do in the Pokemon community, or in the unofficial Pokemon community, to try and rectify some of these issues.
Yeah, no, it's these two are friends too, so I'm not surprised they decided to do this. But there's no obligation at all. In all intents and purposes, this is a new game, not at all related to the first one, and so it was nice of them to agree to do this, especially on Brandon's end, because he was definitely on the shorter end of the stick at that point. But it's cool to see that nothing's really going to be affected. They're going to be able to get back to the same spot they were, and then we'll see how it goes from there.
Yeah, and one of the things that can happen in Pokemon, again, because you're trying to approximate the same game state, critical hits are a thing that can happen. I don't think that would affect the games too much in this position, but we do go ahead and see the fake outs going into... Hey, look, I can't deny my psychic abilities. I might be a psychic type secretly, but again, it doesn't seem to have done an appreciably extra amount of damage. The only thing that this might change is the amount of your time, which I don't think would be a problem based on the two teams that we're seeing here.
No, I don't think it'll be an issue either. This is going to be almost the same exact state as it was before the game freeze. The only thing that could happen is if the Moonblast crits the Incineroar, that could be relevant, but hopefully it doesn't.
Yeah, we don't want to have too many things changing things up, since these players have, again, kindly agreed to basically bring things back to the normal game state. Yep. One thing that I will note is that Incineroar is, again, in a different slot than it was previously. So, not quite the exact same game state, but we are basically back to where we were.
Right.
And it looks like we're not going to have another double game freeze, because we do have that move time and your time ticking down.
Yep. So we're back on track.
At this point, again, we've had that throat chop that locked out Roar, and now Leonard is in a position where he's got the +2 speed, the +2 special attack. He's in a pretty good position here.
Yeah, this is fantastic for Leonard. The chip damage from Fake Out and Throat Chop, possibly enough to score a knockout with either of these Pokemon with this Moonblast. As we're going to see, it is enough to take out that Xerneas there, so...
Ooh,
oh, no, it's not.
Not quite.
Oh, wow.
So, because we're not getting an actual clean feed from this, we're watching it on Discord, so that 1 HP is just a little bit pixelated, so we do apologize about that, but it just barely not enough to pick up that KO, which is incredible. Again, speaking to the bulk of Brandon Xerneas, which we have expounded on countless times already just today, but we do see that Throat Chop. We see the Fake Out, we see U-Turn coming out of Leonard's Incineroar. So basically we can kind of infer the last move is probably a Fire-type move, knowing that he's got a Groudon as well.
Right.
But, what an incredibly supportive Incineroar here.
Yeah, no, that U-Turn was a very smart play there. He knew that he wasn't going to be able to knock out that Incineroar because he wasn't targeting it. And so the U-Turn gets a little bit more chip damage. It's definitely in range of a +2 Moonblast now. And yeah, he gets this Groudon in, which is able to threaten it with a ground type move. And so, yeah, honestly, knocking out that Xerneas really isn't that much of a big deal, because now you have your Groudon in front of a Xerneas and Incineroar, both of which are pretty heavily threatened by it. And so there are definitely worse things that could have happened for Leonard that turn.
Yeah, honestly, I think that it was pretty good for Leonard here. Having that 1 HP survival, obviously that's not something that you can necessarily plan for or expect. But in this case, what it kind of allows Leonard to do is not have Brandon have that open switch, right? We don't want to call it free, because taking a KO to switch out a Pokemon isn't necessarily free, but It is an open switch for sure, that he would have been able to bring out that Amoonguss, which would have had that Amoonguss having more threatening capabilities, but now he has to actively switch that Incineroar out to keep it around. To allow it to Fake Out again, to allow it to intimidate anything in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very smart substitute again there. He knew that Moonblast would be able to finish off Incineroar. Xerneas wouldn't be able to do much to his own Groudon, and so he gets a substitute up. The Groudon can't be intimidated this turn if Brandon wanted to switch in that Incineroar, and so now something like a Dazzling Gleam and a Precipice Blades or a Fire Punch coming out from Leonard is really, really safe, just because Xerneas is really not threatened by anything at this point.
And one interesting note here is that, especially for any players that are kind of new to the game, it's really easy to assume that just looking at Pokemon count, you can get a really good idea of where the game state is. In this particular format, that may not necessarily be true, because right now, at the beginning of this turn, it was 4-4, right? And now we're in a position where we've got an Incineroar that's basically on very low HP, not going to be able to get an Intimidate off on Leonard's Groudon. Leonard's in a very commanding position here, even though the game state, like the Pokemon count, was relatively similar.
Oh, absolutely. Leonard, even before that last turn, we knew that Leonard was going to a couple of KOs that turn. Pretty much regardless of what Brandon wanted to do. And so now he's still got this boosted Xerneas. He's got this Groudon behind a sub. He's got the Incineroar in the back that has Intimidate. We don't even know his fourth Pokemon yet, and so a very commanding spot for Leonard right now.
So one interesting note here is that because that Intimidate wasn't able to get off on Leonard's Groudon, and we also know that Leonard's Xerneas is very bulky. We have seen that Brandon has extreme speed on this Rayquaza, but it may not be able to pick up any KOs. And Leonard's trying not to take too much damage. He's going to go ahead and go for that Protect on Xerneas. Make sure that he doesn't take a Fake Out. Earth Power is coming out of this Rayquaza here. Definitely wants to do some damage to that substitute. Make that Fade and try and open up his opportunities to win here.
Yeah, very smart from Leonard, just knowing that he wanted to protect his Xerneas from potentially getting knocked out by someone like Fake Out Dragon Ascent. His Earth Power breaking the sub is nice for Brandon, but considering that the Xerneas on Leonard's end is likely pretty bulky and he does have an Intimidate option in the back, Extreme Speed probably won't be able to finish off Xerneas, and Leonard will just be able to fire off a Moonblast and take this game 1.
Yeah, and unfortunately, because he doesn't have that Extreme Speed available to KO this Xerneas, it means that he's almost locked into Dragon Ascent, right? Because he's got Earth Power, he's got Dragon Ascent, Extreme Speed, and Icy Wind.
Yep.
And it really kind of locks Brandon in a position where either he's taking extra damage from this Moonblast, hoping that Assault Vest can keep him in the match a little better, or just kind of hoping for a crit there.
Yeah, I think a crit was his only option at that point, but even so... It would have come down to what Leonard's last Pokemon was, because Rayquaza honestly probably would have been able to solo Groudon and Incineroar from that point, but you still have to worry about if Leonard has Salamence in the back, then it's probably over. If Leonard had Cresselia, it's probably over, and so Leonard just played that super well, especially after that turn 2 where he prevented the Roar with Throat Chop and got his Xerneas boosted while Brandon's didn't. It's kind of an interesting lack of Geomancy from Brandon there, because from that turn on, Brandon was playing defense, but if he had been able to Geomancy himself, it would have been a much different story, because both of these players would have had that big offensive option.
Yeah, and again, as we've mentioned previously, previous rounds, previous games, this format in particular feels like it's one of an information game, right? And I think that one credit to Leonard that I can't emphasize enough is that we didn't see that last Pokemon.
Right.
Which means that that's at least 25% of the information available that Brandon just doesn't get. So at that point, Brandon can make assumptions and make changes on his team, his 4 that he's picking. But in the back of his mind, he's always kind of got a question. Okay, but how does this fare against that potential 4th Pokemon that he brought?
Right. And against a team like Brandon's, you would kind of expect Salamence to be that last Pokemon. Salamence doing pretty well against Rayquaza, Amoonguss, Incineroar, and so especially having that Intimidate option for the Rayquaza as well. But you could reasonably see either Cresselia or Tapu Fini as well. And so, being Brandon, knowing that you don't really know what Leonard was going for in his endgame had you forced him to get there, it's kind of scary, because you have to start, guessing what Leonard might be wanting to bring. But Leonard, knowing what Brandon was using, has the option to switch it up.
Yeah, so we'll have to see how Brandon adjusts in Game 2. Obviously, getting a Geomancy up would put him in a decent position, but he might also have some information, because these two players are very good friends, so they might have shared some team information here. So Brandon might be privy to more information than we already have. But it looks like Leonard is instead the person that wants to change things up pretty aggressively. So now we've got Tapu Fini and Groudon leading against Xerneas and Incineroar here.
Interesting switch up from Leonard. I guess not wanting to play that turn 1 mind game again with the Roar and the Geomancy and the Throat Chop and everything. And so opting instead to go straight for this Groudon and Tapu Fini combination, which is a really strong combo because Tapu Fini has a lot of support options that directly benefit Groudon. It has Icy Wind, which it's going to give Groudon the speed advantage. It's got Gravity, which can prevent Groudon's Plus Blades from missing and allow it to hit Pokemon that would otherwise be immune. You can run Haze to negate Intimidate or Geomancy boost. You can run Nature's Madness to chip stuff in your range of Precipice Blades. There's so many things that Tapu Fini can do for Groudon. Heal Pulse being the other big one, keeping Groudon healthy. And so it's a really fun combination to use, and it's really pretty good against this Incineroar Xerneas combination because boosted Xerneas can't knock either of those Pokemon out.
So one interesting thing that we've discussed is the fact that Cresselia basically has that 4 move slot syndrome, where it has so many moves that it wants to use, but it doesn't have the slots for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting about this is that some of the moves that you talked about that Tapu Fini has available to it are also moves that Cresselia has available to it. So basically, because Leonard has Cresselia, and he has a Tapu Fini, it's almost like he's got 2, right?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And one thing that Cresselia doesn't have is Haze, like we just saw. Haze trying to target down the Geomancy from Xerneas most likely, but it has the added bonus of negating that Intimidate drop. So Groudon is back to neutral speed. Brandon deciding to switch it up and bring Suicune this time. Hopefully trying to check their Groudon a little bit better than he did before, because Suicune, a very bulky Pokemon, and in combination with that Delta Stream or Airlock from Rayquaza, then it's going to be able to hit Groudon with that Scald.
And it also has some speed control available to it with Tailwind and Icy Wind. And so now we see the Icy Wind coming out of Tapu Fini, as he suggested. It may carry. And so we see the Tailwind out of Suicune trying to counter some of that speed dropping here. And now we've got a U-turn out of Incineroar, trying to get out of here, preserve that Pokemon for later. Maybe shifting his positioning a little better.
Yeah, smart U-turn. He knew that Leonard was probably going to be scared of a switch into Rayquaza and a water move coming into his Groudon, so he felt safe going for a U-turn and not risking the Precipice Blades knockout immediately. And so we do see the Xerneas come in for Brandon. With that speed advantage, it's going to be able to Geomancy before Leonard Xerneas can fire off some kind of attack. But we have seen that Haze come out from Tapu Fini already, so he's got a Geomancy with caution.
So what's kind of cool about this on Brandon's side, right? So he got the U-turn off, and that was after Leonard set his hard switches. So at this point now, Brandon has a -1 speed Suicune with Tailwind. And basically at this point, that Leonard either can't use Haze or can't use Geomancy. Both of those things should not be true, right? Because you wouldn't want to Geomancy your own Xerneas and then also Haze it. So I think that gives Brandon a little bit more information that he can kind of read into, which I find this matchup is it's fantastic. I really like it. So we do see this Moonblast coming out of Xerneas, again, knowing that they're basically these two options where he's either not going for Haze or he's not going for Geomancy, and he kind of splits the difference there, where he goes for the Snarl and the Moonblast. So if there was a Haze, then whatever, fine. I didn't go for the Geomancy, but if you don't go for the Haze, then I've got the Snarl off. This is kind of a cool positioning. So now at this point, I'm actually a little bit surprised that we didn't see a Haze, but getting that damage in on Xerneas and weakening it, bringing it below half, that's got to be a pretty good position.
For sure. Nature's Madness is such a good move. It turns Tapu Fini from this passive Pokemon into something that actually has pretty good damage output considering what kind of moves it usually runs. And so you're able to get Xerneas down from full down to half immediately, which is huge because now it's going to be much easier to take down. And the lack of Haze, he might have wanted a Haze just to be safe in case he decided to Geomancy, but Tapu Fini being so bulky, I believe it can survive a +2 Moonblast, and so even if he did Geomancy, he'd be able to survive the next turn and go for a Haze at that point, and so I think it makes a lot of sense.
And we do see that switch into Rayquaza, as you had thought might be a problem. Groudon going down to a Scald pretty quickly here, just kind of giving a little bit of credit to how much Airlock actually helps out. And so we do see an Icy Wind coming out from this Tapu Fini, doing a surprisingly little amount of damage given Rayquaza's weakness and the fact that Delta Stream is not up.
Yeah, that's a good play from Brandon, because the Groudon is one of the biggest checks to Xerneas on Leonard's team. Yeah, this Tapu Fini is still sitting here with Haze, so you have to be careful to not, Geomancy and lose your shot too quickly, because even though you did knock out Groudon, this game is certainly not over for Leonard, because he has plenty of options left, including his own Xerneas, which is close to full if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So now we do see that Xerneas is going to come back out for Leonard. There have been some Icy Winds out and about. Tailwind should be wrapping up shortly if it hasn't already. Xerneas in a pretty decent position here. And again, we know that this Rayquaza is Assault Vest, and based on the limited amount of damage, yes, this Tapu Fini was snarled, so it's at -1 special attack. But even so, you would expect that a 4-time super effective Icy Wind might be doing a little bit more damage than the 2% that it might have done to that Rayquaza. And Leonard is definitely a smart enough player that he's got these mental damage calcs in play. So he should be able to piece those things together. No,
that's just smart. Like, Tapu Fini is not known for being a strong Pokemon. Even though Icy Wind is double super effective. Now that Assault Vest on Rayquaza coming in handy there, preventing it from taking much damage at all. We do see Incineroar come in, likely wanting to pressure this Xerneas with a Fake Out or a Roar should it decide to go for Geomancy this turn, which it does. And so, a smart switch from Brandon, because he knew that Suicune wasn't going to be doing a whole lot. He might have been able to get a Snarl off, but a +1 Xerneas is still really threatening. And so, Brandon decides to get some damage off when he can. Now he has to worry about this boosted Xerneas, but he does have that Roar option like we did see earlier.
One interesting thing that we see from Brandon here is that he opts not to Mega this Rayquaza. I mean, do you think that was kind of a misclick there, or do you think that was intentional?
I'm not sure. It's a good question. I don't see a reason for him not to, just because the Groudon's already gone, and so there's no other weather you have to worry about. It's not really a big deal, because the damage increase from that Dragon Ascent wouldn't have been super big. It wouldn't have knocked out Xerneas by any means. And I don't know. I can't really think of a reason for him not to Mega Evolve there, so maybe he just kind of forgot that was an option or something.
Yeah, so one of those things that Jake was kind of alluding to is that if Groudon were around, right, then keeping that Airlock in place, that Primal Weather basically would have been negated if he Mega Evolved and then Groudon switched back in. So keeping the Airlock in place means that Groudon's not going to have extra boosting from the sun. And I'm actually kind of worried at the moment. This seems like this has been a long selection.
That's not good.
I'm wondering if this might also be another game freeze, because this might be a really hard state to try and put back together.
Yeah, that would be much more difficult. We were pretty far into this game.
Yeah, and this has been an absolute positioning game.
Right.
So both Leonard and Brandon, they have these very bulky Pokemon, and so this has been an incredible match for them positioning-wise. I've really enjoyed watching it. So watching this look like it might be a game freeze is just really unfortunate, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other explanation for it right now. That's really unfortunate, because this was a pretty great game. And now, unless they decide to gentleman's agreement that one of them was in a pretty clear winning position, I kind of doubt that'll happen.
Yeah, and it seems like a really tough spot, because I don't know that anybody was in a particularly strong winning position yet.
Yeah.
Like that Geomancy just went off, but at that point, we've seen this Rayquaza has an unbelievable amount of bulk.
Right.
So even if that was a Moonblast here, taking out that Rayquaza, it can only go into one spot. So now you're down to, does this Tapu Fini have kind of Heal Pulse, right? Is it going to be able to restore HP on that Xerneas? And is Brandon going to be able to do enough damage to take out that Xerneas? Because I think, looking at Leonard's team, that Groudon was gone. Xerneas is basically the biggest damage-dealing Pokemon on Leonard's team, and if Brandon could have taken that Xerneas out, he was in a pretty good position.
Right. I don't really know. This is tough to call because at this point it's fair to assume it's frozen. Nothing's happened for a little while.
Absolutely.
We haven't heard from Leonard yet either, and so they're probably trying to figure out what exactly to do. But it's really unfortunate. Like you said, this game it wasn't over at all. Either player could have won this based on how the next few turns went.
Yeah. And so I think if this is a double game freeze, right? So that means that they tied the first one, and then Leonard won, right? So that is 1-0-2.
Right. I'm not sure if that happened to me in Dallas in 2018. Of 3 games, I won 1 and 2 of them froze. So I think that's a win for Leonard. I'm not exactly sure how that ruling works, honestly, because like in the games eyes, they've played 3 games, even though 2 of them didn't end.
Right. So I guess it kind of depends on because at that point, right, the entire tournament, game 1, the entire PC froze.
Right.
And that's difficult. So I don't know if that's kind of a TO thing where it's like, oh no, everybody just tied the first one, or if you just like restart the round essentially, right? And so the way that Brandon and Leonard replayed the first one, right? They had that gentleman's agreement, and while officially it was a completely fresh new game, that first game just was already played out, and the second game was just different. For our purposes, it was basically putting things in the same position. But for the official tournament purposes, that would, strictly speaking, be your tie and then a win, and then potentially another tie.
Right.
So, yeah, it's... Yeah. So I just don't... I guess I'm not familiar enough with the rules to know if them, because they replayed that one, like, again, gentleman's agreement, a very sporting agreement between the two of them. So if they just agreed to replay that game because it was so early, maybe they don't. Like, again, it comes down to self-reporting, right? Because the TO can't be at every single table.
Yep.
So if they agreed to replay that game instead of take it as a tie, then this could just be game 2. And so they're playing game 2 as a tie, and so now it's kind of 1-0-1 for Leonard.
I think, yeah, based on what Leonard said, he just said the game they just played was a tie, so it kind of looks like they're treating game 1 as a replay and not a ruled tie or anything. So it looks like we're going to be starting official game 3 here in a second, even though it's the 4th game we've seen so far.
Which, again, like this... I think Brandon made some really nice adjustments, and it's very difficult to kind of figure out how things would have panned out had we played that all out. Because we'd seen all 4 Pokemon that Brandon brought, but I don't think that we saw the 4th Pokemon for Leonard, did we? Did he also have Incineroar?
I think we just saw Groudon, Tapu, Fini, and Xerneas, although I could be wrong.
Yeah. So figuring out what that 4th Pokemon might have been for Leonard could have been, the deciding factor of that game. But either way, it looks like because that game was considered a tie, they are in another game. So that means that the first game was considered a replay at that point. Again, Jake and I are commentating this remote, so we don't have a TO right next to us to kind of explain what's going on with all the rules. So we do apologize for our lack of information there, but it does look like this is going to be a completely different lead out for both players. For Brandon, it looks like Leonard's bringing back the same game 2 lead out. So it looks like this is going to be a completely different game 3.
Yeah, so Leonard's sticking with the same leads, not really wanting to switch it up again. Brandon is saying to go for Incineroar and Suicune. That's what that Pokemon is. So again, we have
the Pokemon that we never see.
Yeah. We have the immediate threat of something like a switch to Rayquaza and a Scald, which would probably knock out the Groudon thanks to that double weakness. But I don't know if Leonard will let that happen, or I don't know if Leonard thinks that Brandon will even go for that, trying to predict something else, and so there's a few options here. The Groudon being at -1 attack isn't fantastic for Leonard, but you know, it does have. If that type of Fini has Swagger, he'll be able to boost his own attack. We've already seen Substitute, so it's probably not Swords Dance Groudon, but there's this lead is so flexible on Leonard's end that there's a number of different things that could happen here.
Yeah, so we do see the Fake Out coming out into Groudon. That's going to prevent that Groudon from getting anything off right now. We don't see any switches out of Brandon, so that does mean that he's not going to be able to take out this Groudon this turn either, but we do see the Tailwind, which gives him a nice speed advantage, and then Nature's Madness, taking that Suicune down to half health, which is going to make it a lot less sturdy in the long run.
Yeah, that's a really nice Nature's Madness from Leonard, because a Suicune makes its money off being bulky and, you know, really being failed to get knocked out by any one move, and so, you know, since it is down to half health already, it's going to be much easier to manage.
So we do see that Brandon is going to hard switch here into Rayquaza, that airlock coming out. Leonard understands that that's exactly what's going to happen, so he's going to hard switch his Groudon out here, bring in Xerneas, which on paper, you know, fairy types are pretty strong against dragon types. Unfortunately for Brandon, that Scald does go into a Xerneas, which is a special attacker, so even if it did get a burn, which is impossible at the moment given the fairy terrain, you know, that Scald isn't able to do that much damage. And another Nature's Madness coming out to a huge, bulky Pokemon in this Rayquaza.
Yeah, Nature's Madness, I really can't state how good of a move it is, because this type of Fini, which is generally a support Pokemon, has already done... It's taken a quarter of Brandon's team's health in 2 turns with these 2 Nature's Madnesses, which is huge. It's super important because, you know, this Rayquaza doesn't have a way to heal itself. You know, Suicune probably carries something like a Pinch Berry, so, you know, if it gets knocked below 25%, it'll be able to eat its berry and get a little bit healthier, but this Rayquaza really, really needs its health to take on these Pokemon on Leonard's team, and so, you know, catching with a Nature's Madness immediately is super nice.
Incineroar coming out here, going to intimidate these 2 special attacking Pokemon, going to allow him to use Fake Out next turn. A Snarl coming out here for Brandon, trying to drop the special attack of this Tapu Fini and the Xerneas, trying to prevent that Geomancy that presumably is now coming up. The animation is on the screen, making that so that it's only +1 special attack instead of +2.
Yeah, so the Snarl helps a little bit, you know, like you said, only +1 special attack, but still probably pretty likely to knock out this Suicune with a Moonblast. We do see a huge heal pulse coming out from Tapu Fini, and so, you know, that damage that Xerneas took earlier, you know, completely negated by this heal pulse now.
Yeah, unfortunately, Scald now did 0 damage to this Xerneas.
Right.
I would also like to reflect for a moment that this fairy terrain, one of the differences that fairy terrain has over the rest of the terrains, like electric terrain boosts electric moves, grassy terrain boosts grass moves, psychic terrain boosts psychic moves. You would presume that the pattern continues with fairy terrain, or misty terrain rather, and boosting fairy moves, but unfortunately that is not the case, which in this particular position is very, very beneficial to Brandon.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
mean, this would be a much more terrifying position for Brandon if that were the case. So we do see that Fake Out of Incineroar now that he's able to use it. And then Icy Wind is going to come out here, so now it's, instead of being at +2 speed, we've got +1 speed. And again, this Tapu Fini, we have seen the haze here, but that's not a thing that you want to do to your boosted Xerneas.
Not at all. An interesting choice for Brandon to Icy Wind there instead of Snarl. You might think that he would have wanted to Snarl to decrease the special attack of the Xerneas more back down to 0. But instead he opts to go for Icy Wind, and, you know, his Tailwind just ran out. And so the Xerneas is going to be faster than everything now, even though it is down to +1 speed. And that Nature's Madness means that Moonblast is able to knock out this Incineroar, and so Leonard doesn't really have to worry about Roar anymore. Because we do know that Roar is an option from that Incineroar, but instead opting to Fake Out instead of, you know, try to reset those boosts.
Yeah, so now we see that Brandon is going to bring his own Xerneas out. We've seen how bulky his Xerneas is. Leonard honestly abusing the fact that his opponent has such bulky Pokemon and just reducing half their health immediately with Nature's Madness. So the bulk of Brandon's Pokemon has almost been entirely negated. And at this point, Brandon opting for more Icy Winds to reduce the speed stats of his opponent's Pokemon instead of going for the Tailwind here. But one thing that I really enjoy seeing out of Brandon's Pokemon, Leonard going for the Icy Wind as well.
Yep.
So one thing that I do kind of enjoy about Brandon's Suicune is that this is kind of raw support here and then an answer for Groudon. So it has a very specific niche that he's planted this Pokemon in. And then he's just kind of playing its niche role almost to the best of its ability at the moment.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The Suicune is doing a lot right now. It's super bulky. It's going to take not very much damage from a lot of Pokemon, and so it does have that option to just kind of sit around, be generally annoying. We actually see a forfeit right away, so Brandon kind of seeing the writing on the wall there. All his Pokemon were under half HP at that point, and so he knew that it was going to be really, really hard for him to stop the freight train that was Xerneas at this point, especially because Leonard still had that full health Groudon in the back that he had to deal with, and so Brandon kind of understanding what was going on, possibly a little bit frustrated by those game freezes, and he didn't really put himself in a great spot to take that game 3, and so Leonard remains undefeated this tournament so far.
Yeah, and again, just kind of reiterating that everything Brandon had was kind of under half health, so it does make sense that he sees that going on, because Suicune is basically his only answer to Groudon at that point. Like, he's got the Earth Power on Rayquaza, but I don't think that he's going to be able to take it out, out full health Groudon. So just amazing positional games played between these two players. I can't overstate that enough, that these two players played phenomenal positional games. And I think that some of these GS Cup matches have a bit of a stigma for being kind of these big damage fests where everything's kind of a one-hit KO, but these two players definitely demonstrating that that's not always the case.
Right.
That you can have these bulky Pokemon and play these positional games.
Yep. Well, that was round 3 from Kansas City. We will be back soon with our last round of Swiss and then Top Cut to follow.